Hello, hello. Let me get my screens on and ready to go. Welcome to another episode of the Healing Hour. I am your host, Sarah Fargo O'Brien. And we are going to be talking about generational trauma and epigenetics today. Should be a really interesting topic. So sort of a newer area of research in the field of trauma and mental health, but it's some pretty interesting stuff. I think you guys are going to definitely find it interesting and useful information, either for your own trauma histories or for people who have trauma histories in your life. What else? Let's see. Do I have anything else to announce? I'll do my check-in. I'm a little bit all over the place this morning. I'll explain that in a minute. I can't think of anything else right now. If there's noise and whatnot up here, today it's because I have my pups up here with me. They like to join me at work, but they can look out the window, and sometimes that means we're making noise. So hopefully they'll be quiet for us today. If you're here, let me know that you are here. Would love to give you a shout out. I appreciate anybody who tunes into the Healing Hour. Let's see. Let me do my check-in, and then we'll just dive in. For those who follow me on LinkedIn, I recently started a position as adjunct faculty at Cleveland State University in their Masters of Social Work program, and I'm working with second-year students, and it is a new role for me. I have been working with professional people for a while, and although all those folks are not always reliable or predictable, more often, I kind of know what to expect. Students is like a whole new ballgame. We got lots of questions, failure to respond by specific dates, and so a lot of follow-up. So this is new for me. Second-year graduate students, I was not expecting to maybe need this much guidance. Yet here we are. So I spent 45 minutes to an hour this morning trying to figure out who's asking what do they need, et cetera, et cetera. For those of you who don't know, I am a practicing psychotherapist. That's my bread and butter. That's basically my full-time work. And I do that full-time all the time, but I see clients all day, Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays every week. And so I'm really not available for my other roles, hats, and jobs on those days. I'm pretty limited to my back-to-back psychotherapy sessions. So trying to, respond to these students and get them to respond back to me. And I can really only check in twice a week about that. This is going to be fun. We're going to see how this goes. But I am excited about it. So far, my interactions with Cleveland State Social Work Department have been awesome. I'm enjoying the staff there. They've been extremely helpful. Big shout out to Katie Kurtz, my girl in Cleveland, who linked me with this opportunity. And she did the same position that I'm doing previously and has also had a good experience. So I appreciate when my network actually gets me paid working gigs. Thank you. That's what I need these days. So I can do a little bit less of that psychotherapy and a little bit more of the stuff that I like to do. So I'm a little bit I looked up and it was 10:55 and I was like, oh gosh, I need to move out of this role and move into podcast host role. So I'm a little bit all over the place. So that's where I'm at today. We have Miss Leanna in the house. Hi, Leanna. Good morning. Happy to see your smiling face. Thank you for joining us. Getting ready to take my 3 deep breaths. If you guys have been following my content, especially this month, talking a lot about breath work, deep breathing techniques, controlled breathing, what this does for the nervous system, the brain, the body, calm, mental health, trauma, all of those things. This is the content in the Integrate Trauma Informed Network Mental Health Support app this month. Our tech guru, Julie Johnson, and founder of Integrate, switches over the content every month, and we follow the same sort of process and available options for the content in the app. Just the theme of the content changes. And this month it is breath as your superpower. So I'm sort of piggybacking on that with some of my content that you will see in my posts about deep breathing techniques, what they're helpful for, how to do them, that kind of thing. So I'm big on the deep breathing. It's one of the very first ways I learned how to regulate things for myself and pay attention to my body and my nervous system after pretty much a lifetime of not ever paying attention. So let's take our 3 deep breaths. Oh, Chasen in the house. Good morning, my friends. Yes, we are up and running today. I appreciate you just as much. Some exciting things happen with Chasen and his organization, HR for You and Transformation Kitchen. And Chasen, I did a podcast with Julie last week, and she told me that you're going to be on her podcast. And I was like, so cool. I'm excited that you guys got linked and have something to talk about there. I think that's going to be great. And yes, Chasen says, go Julie Johnson. Yeah, she is special and brilliant, and I can only learn from her. Like she's a great mentor. I appreciate Julie a lot. And so that's going to be good for you. I'm so curious, like what you think after doing your podcast with her. Big love to you, my friends. Guys, Chasen has a big event, fundraising event for his nonprofit on October the 10th. You can purchase tickets, go to Chasen Forehand's LinkedIn, and you will be able to see all the info and details there. Oh, Jason Forehand also has a podcast. I should be going. This is what I put out in my monthly newsletter. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked from my 3 deep breaths. But if you guys haven't signed up for my monthly newsletter, please go to my website, www.sarahobrienlcsw.com, and sign up for the Timeless Therapist newsletter. It just drops once a month. Promise not to spam your inbox. I don't have time to send you something more than once a month. So I promise that's it. It is pretty robust, but that's just because I only send it once a month. However, I have added sort of a little news section where there are Friends of the Healing Hour podcasts listed. And so a lot of my buddies also have awesome podcasts and awesome guests. So Chasen Forehand has the Time to Change podcast. Julie Johnson has the Empathy by Design podcast. Katie Kurtz has the Trauma Informed Future podcast. And Andrew Stout has the Let's Be Diverse podcast. So you could find links for those in my newsletter that just got put out on LinkedIn last week, or in your email if you have signed up on my website. Oh, Chasen, thank you. Chasen says your newsletter is so good. I'm so grateful. I have no idea if anybody's ever reading that thing. So I don't know what people like and what people don't. And I know some people watching this like, Sarah, what is your business model? What are you doing? I don't know, guys. I don't have one. I go with what feels right. I do the things I like to do. I hope it reaches the people I want to reach, makes an impact. And like somewhere along the way, I can make enough money to pay my bills doing the things I like. So I appreciate some feedback on the newsletter, because I have no way to track any sort of metrics on that and have no idea who is reading it. But I always add some mental health content, so educational stuff that helps us understand our mental health and have better mental wellness. I have a trauma-informed leadership content section with events and articles and apps, right? And all things related to trauma-informed leadership. I have information about the articles I write, things I've been a part of. I was a part of writing a white paper in the month of August on the role of AI in mental health. Super interesting stuff, guys. I have a pretty strong stance. Shout out to Laura Miller, our ethicist over at Integrate Network, spearheading that. She is on the cutting edge of ethical considerations for AI and getting some policies and regs in place to prevent harm that's already occurring. So some information about projects I'm doing. I have information for private practice clinicians. If you're starting one, if you have one, if you want to start one, sort of some tips, tricks, self-care info. And then of course, there's always a list of my digital products and services, which there are of many. So go sign up for that on my website, www.sarahobrienlcsw.com. It comes in a pop-up right after you go to the website if you wait like 3 seconds. And then you can click on it and fill out the little form and you will be signed up for the newsletter. You won't get anything else but the newsletter. Okay, 3 deep breaths and let's dive in. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Here we go. Breath number 1. Inhale. And exhale slowly. Inhale number 2. Exhale slowly. Inhale number 3. Exhale slowly. Okay, let me get my slide deck up here now with us. Get my chat back in case people have questions. Generational trauma and epigenetics. I think you guys are going to really like this today. This stuff is interesting. I actually think it's less confusing to understand than the neuroscience of addiction and the neuroscience of trauma. So if you hung out there with me through those things, I think this is going to be a little bit easier to digest, even though it is, definitely heavily based in neuroscience, science, neurobiological research, which you guys know, I geek out over, all day. I find this stuff super interesting, super accessible for the work that I do, and super helpful in understanding and practicing in mental health care. So generational trauma and epigenetics on the healing hour. Let's go. We know now with research that newborns don't enter the world with a clean slate. Their emotional history begins even before they're conceived, which is pretty powerful, guys. So today we're going to be talking about generational trauma. What is it? How does it happen? Epigenetics. What is that? And what are the differences from genetics or genetic changes? Onset and causes of generational trauma. And of course, impact outcomes and diagnosis and treatment. This sort of format has worked for these neuroscience type topics. Hopefully it's worked for you guys. Okay, generational trauma. What is it? Generational trauma is also called intergenerational trauma, also called inherited trauma, also called transgenerational trauma. All interchangeable words for the same thing. And these are terms for traumatic impacts that are passed from one generation of a family to the next. Said another way, it is a cycle of trauma that passes through families. Ultimately, trauma can have deep consequences for later generations. Some of those consequences are external, such as financial difficulties, or patterns of behavior a family develops in order to cope with the trauma they've experienced. Transgenerational trauma, again, remember, that's interchangeable with generational trauma. So all of those terms mean the same thing that we're talking about today. Transgenerational trauma refers to a type of trauma that does not end with the individual who first experienced the trauma. This is such significant information and discovery in research about the brain, the body, the nervous system, mental health, and the impacts of trauma. I'm going to read that again because I think it's pretty impactful. I want to make sure you get this. So let me get super ready. Take a sip of my coffee. Okay, guys, tune in. I'm going to say it again. Generational trauma refers to a type of trauma that does not end with the individual who first experienced the trauma. Instead, it lingers and gnaws through one generation to the next. Enjoyed that word. Yeah. So it gnaws its way through one generation to the next. So you did not have to experience the trauma to be impacted by the trauma that your parent, your grandparent, your great grandparent, your great great grandparent experienced. Families with a history of unresolved trauma or unresolved depression, anxiety, addiction may continue to pass maladaptive coping strategies and distressful views of life onto future generations. So, we're going to talk about like what part is like passed down in genes and like what part is passed down in patterns. And they sort of work in conjunction. But if you have a lived experience of trauma, you know that you've had to cope in some ways. And most people that have lived experience of trauma have spent some time coping in not helpful ways. So if you spent time coping in not helpful ways and without like moving through resolving and healing your trauma, then all that is just going to get passed down to the next generation. Learning effective and healthy coping strategies and resolving and healing past trauma is what prevents moving it down to other generations. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So with a history of unresolved trauma, you may continue to pass maladaptive coping strategies and distressful views of life onto future generations. In this way, one can repeat the same patterns and attitudes of former generations, regardless of whether they're healthy or not, right? So it's like you didn't experience the trauma, but your parents did. And as a result, they're very mistrustful of law enforcement. So it could be very unhealthy to be that distrustful of law enforcement, and you didn't experience anything traumatic with law enforcement, yet you act the same way as if you did experience the trauma with law enforcement because you have picked up the pattern, belief, and attitude from your family member who did experience the trauma from law enforcement, for example. Dude, Jason, I feel you on this. Jason says it took me decades to see how it's impacting others. Amen, brother. Right? Like, and that requires a lot of your own damn work. And I know you know what that means, Jason. Jason has done a lot of his own work. And it's not always fun, man, because it's not your fault that you are perpetuating traumatic patterns, right? But as soon as you kind of dive into your own work and try to start healing that and realize that that's been the case, like that's a tough part of the treatment process and the healing process, because you didn't mean to have negative impact on the people around you. You've just been trying to find a way to survive, and yet it has had negative impact because a lot of those things happened in and around and to you and had a negative impact on you, right? We basically incur that negative impact, and unless we learn to heal that, we just like keep passing it on, right? Paying it forward in a bad way. There is belief that trauma can change the way our genes function. So not just beliefs and patterns of behavior, but actual gene function. And those changes are then transmitted to future generations. So generational trauma occurs through biological, environmental, psychological, and social means. So the gene function part of generational trauma is the biological means through which it occurs. Evidence suggests that generational trauma can happen in the uterus. So not only can it come before you're even conceived, but then, with like all the generations before you, if they went through traumatic experiences and then did not heal and resolve those and come out with healthy strategies for dealing with that and rebuilding their nervous systems. But you can also experience this in utero. So an example is a fetus being exposed to neurochemicals involved in maternal stress that affect the future development of the fetus or the child. So if mother is stressed or stressed frequently or or experiencing other negative environmental things that are impacting neurobiological or neurophysiological function. And if you watched any of my neuroscience episodes, right, we know that a lot of this stuff is happening inside the brain and the body. And we can't always see that unless we're doing fMRI scans and that kind of thing. But it translates into like behaviors and thought processes on the outside. And so it's the same kind of thing. You maybe can't see specifically how stressed the mother is on the outside, but if neurophysiologically things are happening neurochemically on the inside, that's affecting fetal development and future development. This trauma that extends from one generation to the next begins when a group experiences a traumatic event that causes economic, cultural, or familial distress. In response, people belonging to that group develop physical and psychological symptoms that are similar. Okay, I have a comment in here from Alana. I'm thinking it's Alana. Please tell me if I mispronounced your name. I really want to pronounce it correctly. She says here, I'm being guided into healing generational trauma as a Jewish, I'm not going to get this right, Jewish Ashkenazi woman. Awesome. I'm so glad that you are on your healing journey, Alana. That's fantastic. And she says, I'd love to connect with others who may be going on a similar path. We're cycle breakers and our ancestors and guides are with us. But I'm at the very beginning of this journey and we need to Zoom sometime. Yes, girl, I hear that. Cycle breakers is like a tough role to be in sometimes, right? Alana, I don't know where you are in your life and in your life stages and whatnot. I am past the point of having children, but still believe that me healing my trauma is going to impact future generations. The idea is like we're maybe changing genes back or changing genes for better, and then passing those along, kind of ending, like Alana's saying here, ending the cycle of trauma that just keeps getting passed down in families, right? Like you can pass down a recipe book, you could pass down wealth or a house or whatever. You could pass down beliefs, religion, values, and you can pass down trauma. People who experience trauma may develop health conditions such as anxiety, depression, heart disease, insomnia, GI problems, and things like PTSD. Okay, so if you yourself experience the trauma, it can result in these things. Go back and watch any of my episodes on the neuroscience of, and you will see how trauma impacts the brain and the body negatively in such a way that then we have symptoms of a mental health or physical health disorder like anxiety, insomnia, heart disease, GI issues. Okay, so you go through trauma, you experience maybe some health conditions like those from that list. Then subsequent generations may inherit trauma and those health conditions through factors like discrimination and prejudice. It can be, and this is a really important piece here, guys. It can be silent, covert, and undefined, surfacing through nuances and inadvertently taught or implied throughout someone's life from an early age onward, right? So inheriting those health conditions aren't necessarily super obvious, right? Like you might have anxiety, but it's covert and undefined, and you think it's just the way you are, just the way you think, just the way things are. And really it's anxiety, perhaps. And maybe that's because, let's like your parent was sexually assaulted. And so they have a lot of anxiety as a result. So even though you weren't sexually assaulted, you might inadvertently be taught to be anxious of strangers, going out at night, walking places by yourself. And that's not really based on your experiences. That's based on your parents' experiences. And they've sort of inadvertently taught you or implied that you should also be afraid of this thing and have anxiety. Okay. I think that piece is important. The fact that what the future generation experience can be silent, covert, and undefined, surfacing through nuances and inadvertently taught, right? This is not always obvious to us, guys. And we didn't have this information like, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. So, I mean, even if you had kids 20, 30 years ago, you didn't know this. And so if you went through something and didn't heal it before you had kids, chances are you passed it down to them unbeknownst to you, unknowingly. But that's why we need to pay attention to this stuff now and figure out what we can do to prevent this from happening in every future generation from here on out. Let's talk about the interesting thing of epigenetics. What is this? This is one way that trauma passes down in generations through epigenetic changes. So back a little while ago, I said there is biological, psychological, environmental, and social means in which generational trauma can get passed down. Epigenetics is the biological means in which trauma gets passed down. The theory is that trauma changes how your genes work, and then those changes of your genes pass down to your children. Trauma affects genetic processes leading to traumatic reactivity being heightened in populations who experience a great deal of trauma. Okay, trauma affects genetic processes leading to traumatic reactivity being heightened in populations who have experienced a great deal of trauma. I'm going to go into like what that means in some of those populations in a little bit, so hang tight. So this is different. I'm going to go into a little bit more differences in genetics, but let me set it up a little bit for us. Okay, your DNA is genes, right? DNA, genes. Your DNA holds your genes. Your DNA includes encoded instructions for cell production. So it's what cells do we produce? Do we produce brown hair cells? Do we produce Caucasian skin color? Do we produce brown skin color? Do we produce green eyes or brown eyes, right? Your DNA also has encoded instructions for what cells are produced or made. Gene expression happens when that code is read and put into action. So although you could have a gene for brown eyes, the gene expression comes out as blue eyes, for a very rudimentary example, right? So maybe you have encoded instructions for brown eyes or blue eyes, and then what comes out is blue eyes. So if what comes out is blue eyes, that's the gene expression. So your DNA read the instructions and put into action you having blue eyes, blue colored eyes, blue eye color, whatever. You guys know what I mean. Not alien, but just like normal blue eye color. Okay. So I hope that's kind of clear. If you have questions, let me know. Epigenetics focuses on this process, looking how experiences can also affect gene expression and whether those changes can be passed along. Researchers in this field believe traumatic experience of all kinds may create tiny chemical tags that attach to our genes and influence how they function. So this is not something we're going to see on the outside, folks. You're going to see somebody behaving in some way, and there's probably a judgment about it. They might be judging themselves about it. Maybe they're behaving in a way that's like substance addiction, right? Or maybe they're behaving in a way like that comes up for me, which is like abject rage and ready to like choke somebody, That's what we're going to see. But what's on the inside is a tiny chemical tag attached to my genes that influence my abject rage. And like that coming out, right? Influences somebody's susceptibility to addiction and potentially, engaging in behaviors as such. We don't see what's on the inside. We only see what's on the outside. And this is why we need to be mindful not to judge what's on the outside, because we cannot see what's on the inside. And something like this might be happening. And it's not this person's fault. Potentially that there's a tiny chemical tag attached to their genes that it's influencing how they function from past generations that experienced trauma that they didn't experience. We can't put blame and judgment on those people. It's not their fault. Is it their responsibility to do something with it now? Yes, that's all of our responsibility as adults, but it is difficult for this stuff to come into focus, guys. Like, not everybody is aware of this in their own life. So have compassion, right? This is the trauma-informed way. Have compassion for yourself and other people. So creating these tiny chemical tags that attach to our genes and influence how they function. We may then pass these tags along to our children and grandchildren. The epigenetic picture is not fully understood, but researchers have found evidence of the internal impact of trauma on future generations. And then if you go back again and watch my neuroscience of trauma episode, trauma is an internal injury. So if you think of like a cut on your arm as an external injury, trauma is like that. It's a cut on the inside. It's an internal injury. And so there is internal from one generation to the next, and a lot of the ways that we're talking about here. Okay. Biological, psychological, emotional, social, behavioral things get passed down. Okay. Epigenetic changes versus genetic changes. Okay. What is it? What are sort of the differences? How are they similar? Okay. So the code's interpretation, your DNA has code instructions. So the code's interpretation may differ depending on certain factors. Examples are your overall genetic makeup, your age, whether you've been exposed to harmful substances, and whether or not past family members experienced trauma. So your DNA reading the instructions, and then your gene expression, living basically, like we could say, like living out those instructions depends on several things, not just whether or not your past family members experienced trauma, but that is one thing, as well as other parts of your genetic makeup. Epigenetic changes are different than genetic changes, which alter your DNA. Genetic changes alter your DNA. DNA is like a set of instructions for your body, like we talked about. Genetic changes can change what those instructions say. In contrast, epigenetic changes change how your body reads your DNA, known as gene expression, which I said before. So it's not changing your genes, it's changing how your genes are read. I hope that makes sense for all the non-neuroscientists out there. That's about as basic as I can get, because I am also not a geneticist or an epigeneticist. So, again, this is like as rudimentary as it gets, but I hope it makes sense to you guys. So epigenetic changes may turn specific genes on or off, right? Like this is like, it turns off the brown eyes, turns on the blue eyes kind of a situation. People with generational trauma may have certain genes that are not expressed as usual. Okay, so epigenetic changes, let me go back one as we link all this together. Epigenetic changes due to generational trauma change how your body reads your DNA, changes how your body expresses the genes, changes which genes get turned on and which genes get turned off. So certain genes that are not expressed as usual maybe got turned off. Or ones that shouldn't be expressed got turned on, which increases a person's risk for certain illnesses like anxiety, depression, heart disease, etc. So again, you don't have control over this, right? You don't know what the hell is happening inside your body when you're being, grown inside uterus and then whatever happened in your family before you were there, you don't know what's happening, right? You don't know how your genes are getting expressed. You don't know that past trauma and your genes getting expressed in a certain way means that you have anxiety now. You don't know that. That's just what's happening. But it's really interesting because this is why we can just have blinders on completely to our trauma and its impact on us. It just seems like it's how we are because it's how we came out. Yes, it's how you came out. It's because past generations experienced trauma and passed it on to you. Yeah, you came out with anxiety. That makes sense. Based on this information, that makes sense to me. I hope that makes sense to you. And even with the information and research we have, it's hard to pinpoint exactly why certain genes are expressed differently and people have family members with trauma. So we need more research. So we just know that this happens. We don't know why this happens. Other ways that people inherit trauma from their ancestors is through factors like discrimination and prejudice. So we're going to get into more of those like causes, okay, of generational trauma and epigenetic changes, okay? This kind of trauma, generational trauma, happens when a group collectively experiences a horrific event such as abuse, discrimination, natural disasters, racism, and war. These events may lead to anxiety, depression, and PTSD among the people directly affected by the traumatic experience. Then those folks may pass on their trauma to their offspring and so on. We know our own traumatic experiences can impact our mental health. Epigenetic studies suggest that trauma past generations may also play a role in our mental health issues. This is what Alana was talking about in healing her generational trauma as a Jewish Ashkenazi woman, because in case you guys have not been aware, Jewish individuals have been discriminated against and abused for a long time. And so even if Alana hasn't experienced that discrimination, abuse, and racism directly, it's likely that all of her ancestors that experienced that it changed the way they function, as it would, right? If you've experienced that much trauma, it would change the way you function. And if you watch my podcast on the neuroscience of trauma, you'll understand that it changes tons of things on the inside that we just notice on the outside, right? So it makes sense that those things are going to change on the inside as a result of ongoing discrimination and traumatic experiences. Yeah, that's going to change the way you function. And so then we pass that down to others. And now Alana, is charged with the task of healing that for herself. And then ultimately what that's going to do is heal it for future generations, which is super interesting, right? Like how all this connects. So we already know that trauma can get my words right. We already know that trauma can manifest itself through stress, anxiety, fight or flight, another heightened alert system in our brain and bodies. Go back to my neuroscience of trauma to understand how that can impact you if you experience a traumatic situation. But intergenerational trauma can also mask itself through learned beliefs, behaviors, and patterns that become ingrained into the brain and body, impacting the way we function in the world. This kind of wiring, or I'll say rewiring, so the neurophysiological changes or the neurophysiological impact left over from trauma, again, go back and watch the episode and that will make a lot of sense to you. It rewires how your brain was supposed to function and wires it differently so that it's really not functioning in the best way. So this kind of rewiring impacts personalities, relationships, parenting, communication, and views of the world. So this is why folks with lived experience of trauma and any of their ancestors that had lived experience of trauma potentially function differently than folks in this world who don't have lived experiences of trauma or don't have family members and ancestors who had lived experience of trauma. This makes sense that these folks are not going to behave in the same ways. They have different life experiences, different impact on brain and body, different gene expressions, beliefs, behaviors, and patterns that are taught to them as a result. Of course, they're not going to function the same. And the whole point of trauma-informed care is that we don't make that distinction, like that we don't say, well, I guess it's sort of understanding it's like those with trauma are going to behave differently. And to have a compassionate world, we need trauma-informed care. So instead of singling out people and be like, do you have trauma? Do you have trauma? Oh, you do, you don't? Okay, I'll treat you this way. I'll treat you this way. Trauma-informed care assumes that everybody's had trauma because that's the best option, right? We treat everybody with compassionate care as if they've had trauma, and it's really good for everyone. But of course, there is a difference in functioning, which is the need for trauma-informed care. The world is not designed for folks that have nervous system activations due to trauma. It is designed for people that can just plow through, function, do what they need to do, not have a lot of hiccups. We don't have symptoms that hold us back, other barriers, those kinds of things. And like, folks, the world is just not like that. There are way too many people that have experienced trauma. And dear God, if we look at history, probably everybody has some sort of ancestral history of trauma. Some other causes. So generational trauma is linked to a range of experiences, including indigenous genocide, slavery, racism, the Holocaust, war, famine, natural disasters. Generational trauma is also linked to adverse experiences during childhood, like abuse and neglect, sexual abuse, chronic poverty, poor physical health of the mother, or stressors that the mother experiences during pregnancy, like we talked about before, that changes the neurochemical makeup of mom, which impacts growth and development of fetus. Specific groups of people are certainly more vulnerable, if we're talking about cause, more vulnerable to experiencing or having generational trauma due to their histories. Specifically, ethnic and racial minorities have a higher risk of generational trauma than white people. That's just fact, guys. That's just science. Individuals of ethnic and racial minorities have experienced more discrimination, racism, slavery, genocide, abuse, and all kinds of things. So it makes sense, like for generations, that they've passed that down, especially in cultures where white people had more power and control over ethnic and racial minorities. Okay, so it's not to say white people can't have generational trauma. Hello, here, I'm a white person with generational trauma, and mine isn't necessarily from ethnic and racial minority issues. It's from like a whole lot of interpersonal and family abuse. And I don't know if there was external abuse from those folks, but it's definitely been experienced within family systems in past generations of mine. And that's how I have it. It's also a strong belief that my mom was highly stressed when she was pregnant with me. They lived in Germany during the Cold War. My dad was gone a lot on missions or training missions, and my mom was alone with 3 children under the age of 5. And there were scary things that were happening there sometimes, including protests and burning things. And who knows what else, could have been stressful. That's maybe just like one piece of my story. And we didn't know then that was going to have an impact on babies, on children, right? So higher risk in ethnic and racial minorities than white people of experiencing generational trauma. And that's because, right, being systematically exploited, enduring repeated and continual abuse, racism, and poverty are all traumatic enough to cause genetic changes. Let me say that again. Being systematically, so in systems that are created in which you have to function, being systematically exploited, enduring repeated and continual abuse, racism, and poverty are all traumatic enough to cause genetic changes, guys. These are extremely impactful experiences for our brains, bodies, and nervous systems. You cannot get around it. They are impactful. Causes of mental illness are varied and more accurately described as risk factors. So we can also talk about risk factors as causes for generational trauma. Risk factors, for example, for mental illnesses include stressful life situations, abuse of alcohol or recreational drugs, or a history of abuse and neglect, particularly in childhood and our very formative years. And we know our traumatic experiences can impact our mental health. So generational trauma is another risk factor for developing a mental health disorder. Okay. Diathesis stress theory tells us that you could have a predisposition for a mental health disorder, but it never is actualized because you're not under enough stress or duress, or there's not enough things happening that makes that gene expression show itself or change itself, right? Or whatever that may be. But if you do have a predisposition and you have a high stress environment, whatever that looks like, your probability of developing a mental health disorder is pretty high because you have a predisposition and stressors are high. Now, if you don't have a predisposition and your stressors are low, the probability of you developing a mental health disorder are very low. And now, if you're somewhere in the middle, right, it's let's look at some other risk factors, but stress is one of them. And generational trauma is one of them, right? Among a number of other things that could be risk factors. So in summary here about this, if any one of your ancestors experienced trauma, then the effects of the trauma could be passed down to you. It might not, but it could. And there's a lot of evidence that it likely is. Let's talk about impact. So impact of generational trauma on beliefs, behaviors, and patterns. Remember now that generational trauma can mask itself through learned behaviors, beliefs, and patterns that become ingrained. So this can look like in a belief, I'm not good enough, and that this gets passed down, basically. A behavior could be becoming aggressive when feeling hurt or wounded. This is mine, guys. I use this. These are all mine. I use these as examples, right? Mostly from my own life or from my people in my family system, because that is where I have the most experience with trauma and the effects and impact of it. So masking itself through learned beliefs and behaviors can look like I am not good enough. And that could be an indicator that you have generational trauma, basically, or that's been passed down. It can mask itself in behaviors like becoming aggressive when feeling hurt or wounded. 100% my family, a bunch of screamers and yellers. It can mask itself through patterns that become ingrained, like blaming others instead of taking responsibility for hurt, for problems, for wrongdoing, whatever, for consequences. This can also, excuse me, this can also look like, it can mask itself through things like that become ingrained, like sleep disturbances, emotional dysregulation, substance abuse, hypervigilance or hyperarousal, dissociation, self-esteem issues, mistrust. I can check off just about every single one of those. Except dissociation and substance abuse, I have everything else. These things were likely passed down to me, in addition, perpetuated through behaviors and beliefs said out loud or done out loud in my family system growing up. So it's likely passed down through gene expression and through modeled behavior and learned behavior in my family system. Okay, let's talk about, let me go back here. So the impact on beliefs, behaviors, and patterns, and the impact on emotional, behavioral, and relational patterns and things. Okay, so this can show up as recurring emotional issues. If you or family members struggle with chronic anxiety, depression, or anger, it's possible they're experiencing trauma handed down to them by other family members. If you have behavioral patterns, recurring behaviors like substance use, substance abuse, violence, or emotional withdrawal in your family, likely a sign your family is impacted by generational trauma. So if like addiction runs in your family, man, there's like a 99% chance the trauma also runs in your family. Addiction doesn't come out of nowhere, folks. It is a symptom of something else. Same with violence, same with emotional withdrawal. Emotional withdrawal is a symptom of something else. And if that's how we learned to stay safe, to cope, then that behavior and learned behavior also gets passed down in your family. If you have several family members struggling with substance abuse, this may be due to an emotion that's been passed down to them. And that's how they cope with it. You know what I mean? It's a tricky and frustrating cycle. And it takes a lot of awareness to heal your nervous system, take good care of yourself, and resolve trauma, even if it wasn't yours that you experienced, but instead just the patterns and behaviors that your family passed down because of the trauma they experienced. Another impact is relationship difficulties. Struggling with trust, intimacy, or maintaining healthy relationships may be a sign that trauma has been passed down. This is me all day. Definitely struggle with trust. Impact on physical health and development. Physical symptoms, things like unexplained chronic health issues such as headaches, stomach problems, or fatigue could be indicators of generational trauma, as unresolved emotional issues may and often do manifest as physical health problems. We also know that trauma can have a significant effect on the immune system and can contribute to the generational curse of autoimmune diseases and other chronic illnesses. Cancer run in your family? Trauma probably runs in your family too, or it exists back there somewhere that resulted in a physical health problem of cancer. And now that gene expression has been passed down, and your risk of cancer in your family goes up. Just like your risk of anxiety goes up, or your risk of substance abuse goes up, or your risk of insomnia goes up, or your risk of GI problems go up. Autoimmune disorders, almost every single one, is linked back to trauma. Trauma itself can contribute to poverty, compromised parenting, diminished attachment, chronic stress, unstable living environments. And these things can directly impact children in their development. So if you're the child of somebody who experienced trauma, they might be struggling as an adult with poverty, with effective and healthy parenting, with how to attach to their children in healthy ways. With if they're struggling with poverty, then they might have unstable living environments or moving frequently. So even though the child didn't experience the trauma the parent did, the effects of the trauma that the parent experienced can contribute to the child developing trauma responses. It's quite circular, isn't it, guys? And we're all very interconnected, aren't we, guys? And we get a lot of stuff from our family, whether you want it or not. And so it's just helpful if we have this information so that we can actually reach healing, so we can actually reach resolution. If we just keep denying these things, like my family, they'll be like, oh, it's not that bad. It's better than the generation before. It's like, that's not good enough, man. Like, this shit is still terrible and it's wreaking havoc on life and our family members. Everybody's fucked up. So saying like it could be worse is not helpful, or it was worse in generations, not helpful. It doesn't matter if it was worse in generations before. It's still impacting the generation now. We still need compassion and healing and care if we want to move out of this space. So another massive impact of generational trauma is poor mental health. Trauma can cause or worsen a range of mental health disorders, including depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, dissociation, derealization, opposition defiant disorder, OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder. Generational trauma and learned behaviors are related, but there are distinct differences. So let's talk about that. Generational trauma refers to the emotional and psychological biological impact of traumatic experiences that are passed down through family lines unconsciously. Even the biological, we're not aware of that often. It's not like we got to scan and say, oh yeah, okay, there's that gene expression for trauma, I'm going to pass that down. We don't know that. It happens unconsciously. So generational trauma refers to experiences that are passed down through family lines unconsciously, versus learned behaviors, which are modeled and sometimes explicitly taught more consciously. They maybe don't know where they learned the behavior, the person with trauma, but they are actively teaching that to their children, right? Like in the brief example I gave earlier of the sexual assault victim who then passes on the anxiety about being out at night, walking places by yourself, etc. That's a explicitly taught behavior to not do those things because it's not safe for you to do so. That's an example of a learned or taught behavior versus some other things that are, the silent, nuanced, undefined things that unconsciously get passed down, like a belief that I'm not good enough because I experienced sexual assault. Okay, we're still talking about impact, guys. A lot of impact of generational trauma. So, impact on mental health disorders and substance use disorders. This kind of trauma, generational trauma, can manifest, again, in anxiety, depression, or unhealthy coping mechanisms that affect multiple generations, even if people haven't directly experienced the original traumatic event. This is what you have to know, guys. You don't have to go through the Holocaust to experience the negative impact of your family members who went through the Holocaust. That is what we're saying here. And then learned behaviors, however, are actions, attitudes, habits, consciously or unconsciously adopted by people through observation or interaction with their environment, particularly family members who are teaching you things, right, or rearing you, raising you. An example, family history of substance abuse can often be viewed through the lens of both generational trauma and learned behavior. It's a learned coping strategy, and that we often unintentionally teach that to our children. If we have an addiction issue and they see us using a substance when we are angry, when we are sad, to wind down at the end of the day or whatever, that's a learned behavior. They learn that thing works for coping. Another example, for families affected by generational trauma, the use of common substances like alcohol could be a coping mechanism passed down unknowingly through the generations, like I just said. Traumatic events experienced by older family members, such as loss, abuse, or significant hardship, could have led to substance abuse as a means of escaping pain. So that's how it could have been passed down. And this pattern of using alcohol or substances to numb or self-medicate could then have been adopted by future generations, even if they don't directly experience the initial trauma, right? So even if they didn't experience the loss or abuse that the family member did, and for which reason the family member used a substance to escape pain, the next generation maybe didn't experience that loss or abuse, but may still engage in the pattern of alcohol or substance use as a means to escape pain or self-medicate or cope. Let's talk about some examples based on research. So generational trauma can show up in many ways, from the way your family members speak to you to your attachment style. So I also have lots of information on attachment style. Go to my website, www.sarahobrien.lcsw.com, to learn more about that. But this is also true in my life. My anxious, insecure attachment, 100% a result of my adverse child experiences and trauma. So an example of that, it can show up in many ways from the way your family members speak to you to your attachment style. So example, did grandpa always seem angry for no reason? Did Aunt Sue seem a little anxious or paranoid to you, even during times when it didn't feel necessary? These could be signs that generational trauma is rearing its ugly head, right? So if grandpa is like always angry and that's the way he speaks to you, or Aunt Sue is always paranoid and is telling you about that, like that can impact you. And it's maybe because of past trauma or past generational trauma that they behave that way to begin with. Experiencing severe trauma, for example, can cause you to produce higher levels of the stress hormone in order to survive. So if you experience chronic trauma, like in childhood abuse and neglect cases, in domestic violence cases, in experiencing several environmental or natural disasters, or social traumas like slavery, genocide, those types of things, you can produce a higher level of stress hormones to survive because you're always in a traumatic situation in which you have to survive. So these higher stress levels may be passed on to descendants who didn't experience that trauma. And again, we have research on this. A 2015 study involving children of Holocaust survivors found this to be true, like they had higher stress levels. So this is higher levels of stress hormones, which are neurochemicals in your brain and body, even though they didn't experience the Holocaust. That's neuroscience research. Another study, sons of Civil War soldiers who survived Confederate prisoner of war camps were likely to die earlier than sons of soldiers who weren't captured or who were placed in camps with better conditions. So even though their children did not experience the Civil War or was not a prisoner of war in a camp or in a prisoner camp, still affected them negatively, and they died earlier than their counterparts. Another study showed that children whose mothers survived the Tutsi genocide during pregnancy were more likely to experience PTSD than children whose mothers who hadn't experienced that trauma. So if mothers survived the Tutsi genocide and were pregnant at the same time, their children were more likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder than mothers who were pregnant during that time who did not go through the Tutsi genocide, right? This is how it's passed down. That's about as clear as it gets. And while generational trauma can affect us all, those at higher risk are in families that have experienced significant forms of abuse, neglect, torture, oppression, or racial disparities. These are the people with the highest risk, most risk factors. What can we do about this? We must educate others to prevent generational trauma from continuing to get passed down. It's Alana doing her heavy and significant healing work as a Jewish Ashkenazi woman. It is me doing the very difficult healing work from childhood abuse and neglect to prevent that continuing to get passed down, right? People need to understand this and be educated on this. And if you're an adult now, that this is your responsibility. Putting your head in the sand, saying you didn't have control over it, et cetera. This is just the way you are now, et cetera, is not helping. You're not helping yourself. You're not helping your children if you have them now, and you're certainly not helping future generations. So you're going to have to get past the fact that this wasn't meant for you, yet you have picked it up and have to deal with it now. Big part of the healing process. For me, that's been a lot of anger and resentment. Hard part to get through. So studies have explored the effects of generational trauma, like we were talking about, on Holocaust survivors, Khmer Rouge killings in Cambodia, Rwandan genocide, displacement of American Indians, and slavery of African Americans, among others. And while some results are mixed on how trauma is manifested, many studies uncovered higher rates of anxiety, depression, like I haven't said this enough, and PTSD and trauma survivors and their children. So if you have anxiety, depression, or PTSD, we need to start looking at family history. Like if you can't pinpoint something in your own life that's happened, then we need to start looking at family history because it's likely that's where it's coming from. So what are some treatments for generational trauma? EMDR, and that's eye movement desensitization reprocessing, somatic therapy, which are things like breath and body work, CPT, which is cognitive processing therapy, CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, developing sustainable self-care, and healthy habits for yourself, and resolving and healing the past trauma. Oh, I lost my slide deck, guys. Give me 1 second. Because I think I maybe have one more slide for you here. Give me 1 second. So sorry. Here we go. Okay, I thought I had one more slide of content. So, if you know this about you, you know this about your history, you know that past generations have trauma. If you know you're Jewish, if you know you're African American, etc. If you're a Native American or American Indian, or you have that in your DNA, right? Like then, and you're having any of the issues that I've talked about, maybe want to look at how we can like heal your trauma. So, psychotherapy treatment, a very, very, very well-informed, trauma-informed skills coach or somatic processing coach. Potentially, you can do that in psychotherapy, but there are maybe some really good coaches out there. Really vet your coaches, man. Psychotherapists are vetted by state boards and a number of other people, but your coaches are not. So if you guys are going to choose to get help with a coach, please do your due diligence. How can I further help with healing from generational trauma? Well, I have lots of freebies on my website. Two in particular I'll point you to are the trauma responses quick reference sheet. So you can see or any of these things if you're having some of these responses, you might want to look into generational trauma. And the Love Yourself workbook. So self-compassion is the way out. It's the way out of trauma and repeating things that are not helpful. So that workbook is just like a lovely little guide that helps you do that better. You can also purchase some of my digital products, specifically the Intuition and Inner Knowing digital workbook. This is designed to create self-trust and inner safety, which is something that we often don't have if we experience intergenerational trauma or our own traumatic experiences. And then also the I Am Worthy as Fuck digital workbook. And this is designed to increase your self-compassion and walk you through some ways that will help you do that and sort of have that stick. Okay, I also offer one-to-one skills coaching. Of course, I'm a trauma-informed coach. I have gone through the Beautiful You Coaching Academy certification course. I am in a practice community, and I am a psychotherapist of over 15 years. I am very well equipped to work with you in the one-to-one space on teaching coping skills, recognition skills, body awareness skills, communication skills, conflict resolution skills, all things that relationship skills, all things that can be impacted by generational trauma. And I am going to be offering a special September deal. Stay tuned. I also do business to business consulting with executives, team leads, and managers, etc., for building habits and healthier workplaces. So the September deal, schedule one coaching session with me, one-on-one session, either 30-minute or 60-minute. It doesn't matter which one. And you'll get 2 of my digital products, either workbooks or ebooks or whatever, for free. This is up to a $49 value for my digital workbooks. So if you schedule and attend either a 30 or 60-minute one-on-one coaching session with me, and you just have to do one, and we can talk about what your goals are and how I can help you reach those goals, and what you want to see in yourself, right? And so we can start laying out the groundwork in that first session, and then you will get 2 of my digital products for free. And you maybe want to choose 2 digital products that you want to go through or want some assistance with in your one-to-one coaching with me. So do that and get some of these awesome digital products, guys. Like, I've been a therapist for a long time. I have access to so many resources for behavioral, psychological, social, emotional, and relational change. So these are all backed in science and psychotherapeutic interventions. And even though this is not psychotherapy, they are rooted in the science for psychotherapeutic interventions that create change. So use my Calendly link to sign up. It's just calendly.com/thrive and shine cc/30 minutes. And if you want 60 minutes, just schedule 2 of those or email me and we will find a time. But get up with me, guys. You can also find that Calendly link on my website, www www.sarahobrienlcsw.com. All right, I've managed. Oh, I need to update this. Damn. Didn't update it before this. I was really busy. Okay, this is almost my my schedule for September. Today, generational trauma and epigenetics. I'm going to be talking about the vagus nerve next week. I'm going to be talking about how trauma is held in your body the week after. But on the 25th, I'm not going to be talking about how to manage overwhelm. I'm going to be talking about that on October 2nd, because on the 25th, we are going to have the man himself, Chasen Forehand, and my buddy on this show talking about the healing aspects for him of the nonprofit that he has started and growing and is booming and is awesome, as well as his big event that's coming up in October. So next week I will update that. But on the 25th of this month, September 25th, we are going to have Chasen Forehand on the Healing Hour, guys. I'm pretty excited about it. Who am I? I am a licensed clinical social worker in Virginia and Maryland. I am a trauma-informed leader and leadership strategist. I am a trauma-informed coach and consultant, speaker, trainer, and of course, private practice or therapist consultant. And I have a new thing. You guys heard me say this in the beginning. Look, I got organized enough to do this. If you have a podcast that you want me to highlight, link with me, connect with me. Does it fall in line of like wellness, healing, trauma-informed care, trauma-informed leadership? I would love to shout out you on my show so people have other vetted places to go to get information, to learn things, to be a part of their communities or learn better leadership strategies. So I have started the Friends of the Healing Hour podcast list. So we went over these earlier. I'll talk again. The Let's Be Diverse podcast hosted by Andrew Stout, the Time to Change podcast hosted by Chasen Forehand, the Empathy by Design podcast hosted by Julie Johnson, and the A Trauma Informed Future podcast by Katie Kurtz. Be sure to check those out. Lots of good information on those. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Healing Hour. You matter. You are worthy. You are loved. Check in with me on my website, send me a message on LinkedIn. Please go to my YouTube. And if you're watching this live on LinkedIn, please go to my YouTube and subscribe. That's just YouTube/@TimelessTherapist and subscribe to have access to all the episodes of the Healing Hour. It's still free to subscribe. It may not be that way forever. So do it now and tell your friends. And don't forget about the September deal for coaching. You'll get 2 free digital products with at least 1 scheduled coaching session. So I look forward to seeing you guys, helping you grow, helping you heal, helping you increase your self-compassion and self-care so we can perform optimally in our roles in the world and take good care of ourselves. I'll see you guys again next week at 11 o'clock on Thursday, September 11th. What a big day. Thursday, September 11th. And we'll be talking about the vagus nerve. That will be really good for that day. That'll be perfect that day for folks. So check in. The vagus nerve is going to be really healing and helpful, especially on 9/11, if that day impacts you. So I will see you guys next week. Thanks for joining me. Again, my name is Sarah O'Brien, licensed clinical social worker here in Virginia and the host of the Healing